Marcus Delaney was 14 years old, barefoot on a January sidewalk in Galveston, Texas, holding a black garbage bag that contained everything he owned when a stranger in a corduroy jacket handed him an envelope and told him his mother had been dead for 11 years. The envelope was manila, creased at the corners, and it smelled faintly of motor oil. Inside was a single sheet of paper from a maritime salvage office in Port Arthur, 70 miles up the coast. It said that Marcus Delaney, born March 3, 2012, was the sole inheritor of one decommissioned research submarine designation RS Calliope, berthed in dry dock at Granger Boatyard, Port Arthur, Texas. Purchase price, paid in full by the deceased, Catherine Delaney, $250. Marcus read the letter 3 times. His hands were shaking, though not from the cold. He had not heard his mother's name spoken aloud in 6 years. His stepfather, Ray, had forbidden it. Catherine was a ghost in that house, a woman whose photographs had been thrown away, whose name was erased from every surface. And now, standing in the gray morning light with the taste of blood still in his mouth from where Ray had backhanded him across the kitchen an hour earlier, Marcus held proof that she had existed, that she had, in some way he could not yet understand, reached across death to hand him something. He looked up at the stranger, but the man was already walking away, his corduroy jacket disappearing into the fog that rolled off the Gulf. Marcus had nowhere to go. Ray had told him not to come back. His half-siblings, Ray's real children as Ray called them, had watched from the hallway as Marcus was shoved out the front door with his garbage bag. None of them said a word. The youngest, who was 7, had been eating a popsicle. Marcus remembered the color, green. He would remember that green popsicle for the rest of his life. He sat down on the curb. The concrete was cold and damp, and it soaked through his jeans immediately. A stray dog came up and sniffed his hand, and Marcus let it, because the dog's nose was warm, and that warmth was the kindest thing anyone had offered him in a very long time. He opened the envelope again. At the bottom of the letter, below the legal language, someone had written in pencil, in handwriting so small he almost missed it, a single sentence. "The logbook is inside. Do not let anyone else read it first." That sentence changed everything. Not because of what it said, but because of how the letters were formed. The lowercase e with the little tail that curled backward. The T crossed high and thin, almost floating above the word. Marcus knew that handwriting. He had seen it once, years ago, on the back of a grocery receipt his stepfather had missed when purging the house. A receipt with a note that said, "Bananas for Marcus. He likes the small ones." He had kept that receipt hidden inside his shoe for 3 years until it disintegrated. His mother had written on this letter. His mother, who had been dead since he was 3. His mother, who had somehow bought a submarine for $250 and left it to a boy she would never see grow up. Marcus stood. He put the envelope inside his garbage bag, knotted it tight, and started walking north. It took him 2 days to reach Port Arthur. He walked the first 20 miles along Highway 87, where the salt marshes stretched out flat and silver under a white sky, and the wind cut through his sweatshirt like it was made of tissue paper. He slept the first night in a concrete drainage pipe under an overpass, curled around his garbage bag, listening to trucks thunder overhead. The pipe smelled like rust and standing water and something chemical he couldn't name. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ray's face. The flat expression. The way Ray looked at him, like he was a stain on the carpet that wouldn't come out. The second day, a woman in a pickup truck stopped and asked where he was headed. She had gray hair pulled back in a bun and a bumper sticker that said, "Support your local shrimpers." Her name was Delia. She didn't ask why a 14-year-old was walking alone on a highway with a garbage bag. She just said, "Get in," and handed him a biscuit wrapped in a paper towel. The biscuit was still warm. Marcus ate it in 4 bites and had to look out the window so Delia wouldn't see him cry. Delia dropped him at the edge of Port Arthur, at a gas station where the pumps were so old they still had analogs. She gave him a $20 bill, folded small, and told him to eat something with protein in it. Then she drove away, and Marcus stood in the gas station parking lot smelling diesel and fried food from the convenience store and he looked at the address on the letter one more time. Granger Boatyard, 14 Dock Road, slip number 9. He found it 40 minutes later at the end of a cracked asphalt road that dead-ended at the water. The boatyard was not really a boatyard anymore. It was a graveyard. Rusting holes sat in cradles of rotting timber. Barnacles climbed the sides of boats that hadn't touched water in decades. Seagulls perched on the bones of a shrimp trawler whose name had been sanded away by years of salt wind. The air tasted like brine and decay. And there, at the far end of the yard, raised on a steel cradle that was orange with rust, was the calliope. She was not what Marcus had imagined. He had pictured something from a movie maybe, sleek and dark and military. The calliope was none of those things. She was 53 feet long, shaped like a swollen teardrop, and her hull was a patchwork of corroded steel plates that had once been painted blue but were now mottled gray and brown. Her conning tower, a small raised cylinder near the center of her back, was streaked with bird droppings. A dent the size of a basketball warped the port side near the bow. She looked like something the ocean had chewed up and spat out. Marcus walked up to her slowly. The grass around the cradle was knee-high and brown, full of broken glass and rusted bolts. He put his hand on the hull. The metal was cold, rough, pebbled with corrosion. Flakes of old paint came off on his palm. He could feel the shape of rivets under his fingers, hundreds of them, each one a small bump like braille. There was a hatch on the top of the conning tower, a round wheel with 6 spokes. Marcus climbed the cradle using the steel crossbars as a ladder, his sneakers slipping on the rust. He reached the top and stood on the calliope's back. The hull curved away from him in every direction, and he could see the whole boatyard from up there, the dead boats and the brown water and the refineries in the distance, their stacks breathing white smoke into the sky. He grabbed the hatch wheel and pulled. It didn't move. He braced his feet and pulled harder, twisting, and something inside the mechanism groaned, a deep metallic sound that vibrated through the hull and up through his shoes. Then the wheel turned, a quarter rotation, then half, then all the way around, and the hatch lifted with a sigh of pressurized air that smelled like machine oil and old paper and something else. Something he couldn't identify at first. Lavender. It smelled faintly but unmistakably like lavender. Marcus lowered himself through the hatch. His feet found a metal rung, then another, and he descended into the belly of the calliope. The interior was dark, lit only by the circle of sky above him. He pulled a cheap flashlight from his garbage bag, one he'd taken from Ray's junk drawer on his way out, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness and found a world. The calliope's interior was not a wreck. It was preserved. The walls, curved and tight, were lined with instruments, gauges with glass faces, dials with needles frozen in place, switches labeled in faded stencil. A narrow corridor ran the length of the submarine, barely wide enough for Marcus to walk without turning sideways. The floor was metal grating, and beneath it he could see pipes and cables bundled together like the arteries of a mechanical heart. Everything was coated in a thin film of dust, but beneath the dust things were intact, whole. Waiting. He moved forward. The corridor opened into a small compartment, maybe 8 feet across, that held a bolted-down table, a bench, and a shelf full of books. The books were swollen with moisture, their covers warped, but they were real books. Novels, textbooks, a field guide to Gulf Coast marine life. And on the table, centered precisely, was a logbook. It was bound in dark leather, cracked with age, and the cover had no title. Marcus picked it up. It was heavier than he expected. He opened it to the first page, and there, in handwriting he recognized, his mother had written, "This boat belongs to Marcus Delaney. Everything in it is for him. I am writing this in the last year of my life, and I want him to know that I never stopped." Marcus sat down on the metal bench. He pressed the logbook against his chest. The submarine hummed around him, the faint tick of contracting metal, the whisper of air through the hatch above, and he sat there for a long time, in the dark, holding his mother's words against his heart. He read the logbook that night, all of it, by flashlight. His mother's handwriting filled 112 pages. She had bought the Calliope in 2014, the year after Marcus was born, from a government surplus auction. $250 for a decommissioned deep-sea research vessel that had been used by a university in the 1980s to study thermal vents in the Gulf of Mexico. She had planned to convert it, not into a working submarine, but into a home, a shelter, a place for Marcus in case things went wrong. She had known things would go wrong. The logbook made that clear. Catherine Delaney had married Ray when she was 22, already pregnant, already afraid. Ray was charming in public, ambitious in private. She wrote about it plainly, without drama, the way you might describe weather. He hit me again on Thursday. He told me if I leave, he will take Marcus and I will never see him. I believe him. She had spent 2 years working on the Calliope in secret. Weekends when Ray thought she was visiting her sister. Evenings when she told him she was at a church group. She had cleaned the interior, sealed the hull, installed a small solar panel on the conning tower, run wiring for lights. She had stocked the shelves with books she wanted Marcus to read someday. The Field Guide to Marine Life, a collection of poems by someone named Mary Oliver, a math textbook because she wanted him to understand how the world was built. But then she got sick. The logbook entries changed in tone around page 60. The handwriting grew shakier. The entries grew shorter. Marcus, the dates were harder now because the cancer diagnosis had come and Catherine Delaney was running out of time. She wrote, I will not be here to explain this to him. So I am writing it down, everything I know, everything I want him to carry. The last 30 pages of the logbook were not about the submarine at all. They were letters to Marcus, one for every year from age 5 to age 18. She had written them in advance, guessing at who he might become, adjusting her tone as he aged in her imagination. The letter for age 5 was about how to tie shoes and why it was okay to cry. The letter for age 10 was about bullies and how most of them were just scared kids in bigger bodies. The letter for age 14, the one that applied to him right now, said, If you are reading this at 14, something has gone wrong with Ray. I am sorry. I tried to build you a place where he could not reach you. This submarine is ugly and old and it smells strange. But it is yours, and no one can take it from you because I made sure of that. The title is in your name. It has been since the day you were born. Marcus closed the logbook. His flashlight was dimming. The submarine was cold, and he could hear the wind outside pressing against the hull, making it sing a low metallic note. He wrapped himself in a blanket he found in a storage compartment, a wool blanket that smelled like lavender because his mother had tucked a sachet of dried lavender into the fold, and he slept. The next morning he began. The problems came fast. A man named Granger, who owned the boatyard, told Marcus he owed 18 months of back storage fees, $3,600. Granger was 60-something, sun-weathered, with hands like leather gloves. He stood over Marcus and said, I don't care what your papers say, kid. You pay or I scrap her. Marcus had $23. He had no phone, no address, no adult to advocate for him. Then the county got involved. A social worker showed up, a thin woman with a clipboard, who said a 14-year-old could not live in a submarine in a boatyard. She said the words unfit dwelling and minor at risk and emergency placement. She wanted to put Marcus in foster care. She wanted to take him away from the Calliope. Marcus felt the ground opening up beneath him again. That familiar sensation of everything being pulled away. He sat in the conning tower that night and looked at the stars through the open hatch, and he thought about walking away. Just walking, down the road and into the dark and never stopping. His mother's logbook sat in his lap, and the wind was blowing hard off the Gulf, and he could smell the refineries, that sour chemical smell mixed with salt, and he almost did it. He almost climbed down and disappeared. But he opened the logbook to the letter for age 14 one more time, and at the bottom, in a postscript he had missed the first time because his eyes had been too full of tears, his mother had written, There is a compartment behind the navigation panel in the forward section. I welded it shut myself. You will need a pry bar. Do not open it until you have decided to stay. Marcus decided to stay. He found the compartment the next day. It took him 2 hours with a rusty pry bar from the boatyard to break his mother's weld. Behind the navigation panel, in a space barely larger than a shoebox, he found a waterproof bag. Inside the bag were 3 things. First, a savings account passbook from a credit union in Beaumont, Texas, in his name, showing a balance of $11,422. His mother had deposited small amounts every week for 2 years, $20, $30, once $50, skimmed from grocery money, Ray never tracked. Second, a sealed letter addressed to Judge Patricia Hendricks, Family Court, Jefferson County. Third, a photograph. The photograph showed a woman holding a baby. The woman was thin and pale and she was smiling, but her eyes had that look, the look of someone who was already leaving. The baby was asleep, one fist curled against the woman's collarbone. On the back of the photograph, in that same handwriting, it said, Marcus, 1 month old. The best thing I ever did. He used the savings account to pay Granger's back fees. Granger looked at the passbook, then looked at Marcus, and something shifted in his face. He said, Your mama set this up? Marcus nodded. Granger was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I knew a Catherine once. Used to come here on Saturdays. Worked on that boat like her life depended on it. I didn't know she was sick until she stopped coming. He paused. He looked at the calliope. Then he said, I'll waive the rest. You keep your money. You're going to need it. The letter to Judge Hendricks was more complicated. Marcus brought it to the county courthouse himself, walking 4 miles in shoes they were starting to split at the soles. The letter, written in his mother's hand, was a detailed account of Ray's abuse, names and dates and incidents, and a legal petition prepared with the help of a lawyer his mother had consulted in secret, requesting that Marcus be declared an emancipated minor in the event that he was ever removed from Ray's custody after Catherine's death. The petition had been notarized and filed in 2015, a year before Catherine died. She had prepared for this. She had known, with the certainty of a woman who understood exactly what her husband was, that this day would come. The judge read the letter. She read it twice. Then she called Marcus into her chambers, a wood-paneled room that smelled like lemon furniture polish, and she asked him to tell her everything. Marcus talked for an hour. He told her about Ray and the backhand and the green popsicle and the garbage bag and the 2-day walk and the submarine that smelled like lavender. The judge listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, Your mother was a remarkable woman. Then she signed the emancipation order. Oh! Marcus was free. Legally, completely free. 14 years old, standing on a courthouse sidewalk in Port Arthur, Texas, holding a piece of paper that said he belonged to himself. He went back to the calliope and he began to build. Weeks passed. Then months. Marcus worked on the submarine every day. He taught himself from YouTube videos watched on a secondhand phone he bought for $40. He taught himself from library books about welding and plumbing and electrical work. He learned to seal hull plates with marine epoxy. He learned to run copper tubing for a freshwater system. He learned to wire 12-volt LED lights that ran off the solar panel his mother had installed a decade ago. The calliope began to change. The exterior he left alone, the rust and the dents and the faded blue paint, because he wanted her to look like nothing from the outside. But inside, the submarine transformed. He built a sleeping berth from reclaimed wood, planks he found in the boatyard, and sanded smooth by hand until the grain showed through, golden and warm. He installed a small propane stove for cooking. He hung a hammock in the forward compartment for reading. He put his mother's books on a shelf he built himself, and next to them he put the logbook standing upright, its spine facing outward so he could see it from anywhere in the main corridor. Granger started helping, not every day, but often enough. He would appear with a tool Marcus needed, or a piece of hardware, or a box of screws, and he would set it down without a word and walk away. One afternoon, he brought a welding torch and spent 3 hours teaching Marcus how to lay a bead. Granger's hands were steady despite his age, and he moved with the slow confidence of a man who had spent 60 years around metal and water. He never asked for anything in return. When Marcus tried to thank him, Granger said, "I owed your mama a favor." Leave it at that. By the third month, the Calliope had running water, electric lights, a working stove, and a sleeping space that was small but warm. Marcus had painted the interior walls white, which made the space feel larger than it was. And at night, with the LEDs glowing soft and gold, the submarine felt less like a machine and more like a cocoon. He would lie in his berth and listen to the sounds, the tick of metal, the whisper of wind through the hatch, which he kept cracked open an inch for ventilation, the distant hum of the refineries, and sometimes, when the wind was right, the sound of the Gulf itself, waves reaching toward the shore and pulling back, reaching and pulling back like breathing. The Leah came back. She had seen a story in the local paper, a small article about a teenage boy living in a submarine in a boatyard, and she recognized the description. She arrived on the Tuesday with a casserole dish and a bag of groceries and the same pickup truck. She looked at the Calliope and she looked at Marcus and she said, "Well, I'll be damned." She started coming every week after that. She brought food and company and, once, a small potted lavender plant that Marcus placed on the shelf next to his mother's books. The boatyard regulars noticed too. Old men who came to tinker with their boats, retirees with nothing but time and knowledge. They started drifting toward the Calliope. One man, a retired electrician named Howard, rewired the solar panel system so it could charge a battery bank. Another, a former cook on a merchant vessel, taught Marcus how to make shrimp toffee in a space the size of a closet. They came and they went, and none of them made a big deal out of it. But Marcus understood what was happening. He was being adopted, not by any one person, but by a place, by a community of people who had all, in their own ways, been forgotten by the larger world, and who recognized in Marcus one of their own. One evening in late spring, 5 months after he had arrived, Marcus was reading in the forward compartment when he noticed something he had never seen before. The LED light was hitting the ceiling at a different angle because he had repositioned the lamp, and the light revealed markings on the curved metal above his head. Scratches. No, not scratches. Letters. Tiny letters etched into the steel with something sharp, maybe a nail or an awl. He stood on his berth and held his phone flashlight up close and read them. His mother had carved a message into the ceiling of the submarine, directly above where she must have known he would eventually sleep. It said, "You're not what happened to you. You are what you choose to build. I am proud of you already. Mom." Marcus pressed his forehead against the cold metal. He could feel the letters under his skin, as tiny carved grooves, and he stayed there for a long time, breathing, feeling the shape of each word. He did not cry. He had cried enough. Instead, he felt something settle inside him, like a stone finding the bottom of a deep, still pond. It was peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger than pain. The knowledge that he had been loved. Deliberately, fiercely, ingeniously loved by a woman who had spent the last years of her life building a lifeboat for a son she would never see grow up. A year later, Marcus was 15. The Calliope was no longer just a shelter. It was a home. He had planted a small garden in raised beds around the cradle, tomatoes and herbs and peppers that grew thick in the Gulf Coast heat. He was enrolled in school, walking 2 miles each way, carrying his books in a backpack Talia had given him. His grades were good. His math teacher said he had a gift for spatial reasoning, which made sense because he had spent a year learning to fit a human life inside a 53-foot steel tube. He kept the logbook on the shelf. He read his mother's letters on his birthdays, 1 per year, saving the remaining ones. He had read the letter for 15 already. It said, "By now you are taller than me. I was 5'4". If you were taller than that, you got it from your grandfather, who was 6'2" and once carried a calf up a hill because he didn't want it to be afraid of the climb. You come from good people, Marcus. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." Granger died that autumn. quietly, in his sleep, in the small apartment above the boatyard office. He left the boatyard to his niece, who lived in Houston and had no interest in running it. She put it up for sale. Marcus sat in the calliope and listened to the news and felt the ground shifting again, the way it always seemed to shift, and he thought about his mother and the way she had planned for everything except the things she could not plan for. But then the niece came to visit. She walked through the boatyard and she saw the calliope, and she saw the garden, and she saw the boy who had built a life out of rust and lavender. And she sat down with Marcus and told him that Uncle Granger had added a clause to his will 3 months before he died. The clause said that slip number 9 and the land beneath it, a rectangle of earth 30 feet by 60 feet, was to be transferred to Marcus Delaney for $1. Granger had paid a lawyer to make it ironclad. Marcus owned the ground beneath him now. He owned the submarine and the earth it sat on, and the garden he had planted, and the view of the brown water and the white sky. He stood in the conning tower and looked out at it all, the ugly, beautiful expanse of it. And he understood something his mother had tried to tell him across 112 pages of handwriting. Home is not a place someone gives you. Home is a place you refuse to leave. The lavender plant on his shelf had bloomed. Small purple flowers, fragrant and alive, growing in a submarine that was never meant to hold anything living. Marcus touched one of the blossoms gently, and it released its scent into the air, and for a moment, just a moment, the calliope smelled exactly the way it had the first time he opened the hatch. Like someone had been there recently. Like someone had just stepped out, and might, at any moment, step back in. Marcus left the hatch open that night. The stars came through sharp and white, and the Gulf wind carried the smell of salt and distance. He lay in his berth with the logbook on his chest, and he listened to the submarine breathe around him. That low metallic hum that he had come to understand was not the sound of a machine. It was the sound of a mother, holding steady. Somewhere out in the dark, the waves reached for the shore and pulled back. Reached and pulled back, and Marcus Delaney, 14 when he arrived with nothing, 15 now with everything that mattered, closed his eyes and let the rhythm carry him. There were still letters in the logbook he had not read. 1 for 16, 1 for 17, 1 for 18. He would open them when the time came, one by one, year by year, hearing his mother's voice in the shape of her handwriting. He was in no hurry. He had a home. He had time, and the logbook had pages left.